Hey everybody, this is Autoblog Podcast producer Eric here. I'm just hopping in quickly at the beginning of the episode to let you know that this episode of the Autoblog Podcast is brought to you by the SoFi Daily Podcast. Reaching financial independence starts with having the right information. So every weekday morning, SoFi keeps you up to date with important business news and stock market happenings and how they affect your financial life. So get your money right and search for SoFi, that's SOFI, wherever you get your podcasts. On with the show.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Autoblog Podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. Joining me from his semi-quarantined locale out in Michigan is road test editor Zach Palmer. What's going on, man?
Hey there. Nothing much. There wasn't much car news this week, right?
It was pretty quiet.
Nothing crazy going on, yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if Ford's ever going to bring back like an off-road SUV kind of thing. That might be cool. I wish they'd do that.
We'll see.
We'll see. Anyways, we are going to get into that. A ton of Bronco news. And the man who wrote two of those stories from his Bmw Z3 is West Coast editor James Riswick joining us now. What's up, dude?
I'm always in quarantine from you guys. And you couldn't be further away, really.
It's true. Yeah, you're like 3,000 miles away working remotely. I mean,
Yep. I'm dangerous. You can't be around me.
There you go. So, all right, obviously we're going to talk about the Bronco, but it has been a couple days since the reveal, so we've had a chance to sort of parse through more information, kind of figure out what some of the stuff means, what we like, what we don't like, and put it into at least a little bit of a better context. So if you're listening to this while you're walking the dog through the woods this weekend, maybe it's a little more, broken down and nuanced than, in the heat of the moment on Monday night. So we'll talk Bronco, of course. We'll talk about what we've been driving. The Bmw X3 plug-in has spent some time with Zach. I've been in the Hyundai Ioniq, and James has been in the Ford Expedition. So a little bit more Ford news there. Trivia note, I believe, according to, Wikipedia, the Expedition replaced the Bronco in the Ford lineup in the 90s, which is not really a one-to-one trade when you think of it as far as what each vehicle sort of was. But that's something I came across this week, which I found to be interesting. We'll talk about what the hell Stellantis is, or is it Stellantis? I guess it depends on what part of the Midwest or the Northeast or Canada you're from. I don't know. How do you guys say Stellantis?
I've been saying Stellantis.
Stellantis?
Yeah.
I haven't actually had it defined for me yet, though. That's a good question for FCA PSA.
I'm from on Southern Ontario, and Canadian, so that's a hard Stellantis for me. I didn't even think that it would be anything other than. But Americans could go Stellantis. I don't.
Yeah, but I'll say this: three people who are from roughly the same, probably 200-mile geographic area. It would be Stellantis on this podcast, I think, when you're talking Michigan and Ontario. So anyways, like Zach points out, that's what the hell Chrysler is. And I was off yesterday and I came back and I'm like, are you kidding me? This is what FCA PSA is called. It sounds like a submarine from some crazy novel or something. But yeah, that's what they're going to roll with. We'll get into that. And then we'll close things out with a couple of cool Hondas. James and Zach have been in some old ones, Honda Civic Si and a Honda Prelude, which is going to be kind of cool. They both had some time serving the retro fleet. They were both 99s, if I'm remembering right. So, yeah, what a funny coincidence. 99. We'll go back to the eve of Y2K. All right, so let's get into this. The Bronco, like Zach drolly kind of put there, it's a thing, in case you missed it. It's literally the most trafficked, the most attention-getting reveal of the year. I think this has eclipsed the mid-engine Corvette as far as just raw, interest. I think the Corvette was huge, especially for our audience. But then, after a couple days, I think there wasn't this broad moment. I feel like with the Bronco, it's a little bit of a cultural moment. I don't want to go too far here, but I think the way Ford reached out across over-the-air television with those short, like, films. Let's call them what they are, like 3-minute commercials. But still, that was an aggressive way to do it. It's out there. The Bronco is a vehicle that, like the Wrangler, I think people buy them whether they need them or not. So for some people, it's a cool SUV. For some people, it's just this, return of this iconic off-roader. The design play, going back to a cool riff on the 60s model, is cool. Smart, I think, too, even though I actually like the boxy Broncos from later years. So, that's kind of like my real quick initial impressions. Let's just throw it around the horn. Just real quick, what did you think? Like, start with you there, James.
Well, one, I would agree with you. It is kind of a broader, not quite cultural, but it is a broader, outside the automotive realm reveal. Because, Corvette car people get excited, and although non-car people will go, hey, that's a Corvette, that's cool, they're probably not going to buy one. The Jeep Wrangler is an enthusiast vehicle. We get excited about it. But lots of people who would not be considered car or truck enthusiasts buy Wranglers. They know what they are. They think they're cool. And this is the same kind of thing. Plus, there's the Bronco Sport, which opens it up to, I would say, both a different audience. Not just like people, oh, well, I can't afford a Bronco, therefore I'm going to get the Bronco Sport. No, it actually is for different people. So I think it really is important for an audience beyond the car folks. The other thing is, I came about this in the reverse way. So I looked at all the specs and all the features and sat in on the press presentation last week, but they hadn't revealed the photos. So I kind of had a couple of glimpses here and there of it with leaked stuff and then stuff in the half images in the press presentation, but I hadn't seen the car. So I was really only going by what it could do and all the different trim levels. And just by doing that, in flying blind, so to speak, it was really impressive. I was genuinely impressed. We get a lot of, our job is to cover cars when they come out and to tell you everything we know about them. And quite often it comes and goes, and you're like, okay, this is what it was, and you're kind of neutral about it. This, though, I think we're genuinely excited about this as people who love cars. It's cool, both from the way it looks and what it can do, but also there's a lot of character in this thing, and there was a lot of effort that clearly went in, both in terms of the engineering into this, as well as the amount of thought that the designers put into not just like the style, the way it looks, but design in terms of the way it works for people. And they kind of threw the book away. They did different things to come up with unique features and to say, allow for the doors to not only just come off, but to also be stored in the car. That's a pretty significant design lift there. And they came up with new ways to do it. And there's clearly, and the amount of effort they put into this shows that it wasn't just, okay, let's just take a Ranger and put on a boxy body on it and have the roof come off and it'll just be kind of, okay, we just need a Wrangler. Let's just push this out. No, they did so much more than that. And to that, I'm very impressed. And I think it speaks to why people are responding as well, so strongly to it. Including the people like us who cover these things.
On a deeper level, I think this kind of hits with, growing up, I think people used to say things like, oh, why don't they make cars like this anymore? And this was always like a nebulous idea, whether it was like a cool car from the 80s or the 70s or even farther back. And this to me is like this. It's a cool vehicle that takes a design that, while you might say it's retro, I think it's actually timeless is what it is. This is the kind of look that you want your SUV to look like. And what's, I think, exciting about it too is this changes things. Like for the Icons, for the Bollingers, for the, and I'm naming all sorts of different sort of small startup niche, firms. You can't just say, hey, I'm going to make something look cool because, the regular OEMs do that. And this is what I'm going to hang my hat on. Well, now this is a legit thing from Ford. That's, you buy it a lot, or maybe online, depending on how things go, that has a warranty. You don't have to go to Icon or like somebody else like that to get something that really is that like emotional design and performance that you want to drive on a daily basis. This to me is like, and you talk about cars from, yesteryear. When you drive an old car, they're still an old car. They never live up in some ways to like what you could do today, even in just like a modern Honda Civic or Toyota Camry, which have more power than, some muscle cars did when you do like real world conversions. So to me, this is like better than it ever was as far as the Bronco. So that's exciting, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, I will echo many of your guys' thoughts. It's hard to see this any other way than just, a smashing success as far as, what Ford has done to bring the Bronco name back. I think, one of the cooler things that they've done, and this is just an advantage, being the second car like this on the market, it's obviously aimed directly at the Wrangler. They have the advantage of seeing the Wrangler and then going at seeing those pain points that a lot of Wrangler buyers, may have talked about, mentioned, and they've engineered some of that stuff into the Bronco. One of the things that people complain about a lot with the Wrangler is how terrible it rides on the road. The Bronco has an independent front suspension. There's a good chance that it rides a lot better than the Wrangler does in most on-road situations, which, to be completely frank, that's probably where most of these things are going to be spending their time. On top of that, you have more power. In the Wrangler, you can get the 3.6 V6, the 2-liter turbo, or the Eco diesel now. Well, in the Bronco, you can get a 2.7 twin-turbo V6, over 300 horsepower, 400 pound-feet of torque. That pretty much, I mean, we're obviously going to have to wait for the actual curb weight for the Bronco, but I mean, just from a desert running, off-road speed perspective, this thing's going to blow the Wrangler out of the water. And obviously, with turbocharged engines, you have that amount of tuning ability after the fact. Ford Performance is going to get in there. But then another thing that I think is huge, Jeep's halfway fixed a problem when they had that Skyview top they just introduced with the JL, but taking the roof off those things, that's not always that easy. If you have the hard top, you need two people. There's no other way to do it. If you want to take the soft top down, I actually put the soft top on a long-term Wrangler at a previous publication I was at. That was like a 4-hour procedure just to put the soft top on onto that Jeep. But now, the hard top with the modular roof option, like James said, you can take the doors off, store them in there. You can't store the doors in the cargo space of a Wrangler. The mirrors stay on, so you can roll with the doors off and the mirrors on, which is pretty cool. And I mean, I guess I would be remiss without saying it, but hey, there's a manual transmission, and that is something that enthusiasts love. That's something that everybody would complain about if they didn't do. And it's here, and it's awesome.
What I think is cool about that is that's one of the things that I think in a way got lost in the shuffle. It's like, oh yeah, of course it has a manual. And generally I like Ford manuals better than I like FCA manuals, which I guess actually, vary widely across what vehicle. And frankly, FCA doesn't have that many vehicles with manuals in them anymore. I've always found Wrangler manual equipped vehicles to be kind of a little tricky to drive, frankly. That's fine. It is what it is, but it's not my favorite experience. Let me put it that way. And I love driving stick shifts. So, I mean, we'll see. I think, a couple other things too is like, as positive as we've been about the Bronco, because it looks awesome. It is such a jaw-dropping event. I mean, I will say this, there could be issues coming up, like Zach, you and I were talking earlier today about all the issues Ford had at the Chicago factory that builds Lincolns and some Ford SUVs. Don't know of any issues where they're going to build the Bronco in Wayne, Michigan, but it's also like, who knows? We're in the middle of a pandemic. You never know what could literally throw a wrench or something into production plans, or, sometimes launches don't go as planned as far as quality or production, things like that. So to me, that's where they really need to sort of like stick the landing of the launch and get this one right, because people are going to line up and they're going to want this. And the thing they don't want is like a Tesla situation where you have people clamoring for the vehicle and they're not delivering it. Now, I would definitely put Ford much more in the reliable category as opposed to, say, Tesla in delivering cars, of course. But I mean, just to like really try and put this in context, even Corvette had some issues. I think primarily coronavirus related, but I'm sure if they could have launched a car, they would have preferred a more like, easier, fewer headwinds than, a pandemic. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think a lot of people are going to want these. Just taking the survey on Twitter, just seeing the massive response online. On top of that, just people in my personal life, I just messages all over the place, like, hey, when are you going to get the Bronco? Hey, when is the Bronco coming? I had a random radio station out of Washington, D.C. email me the other day wanting to talk about the Bronco. Like, I have never seen this kind of a response from the public. People I know, people that, honestly don't really care that much about cars otherwise. And they're like, hey man, I know that you do all this car stuff. Let me know about the Bronco because I want to ride in one, and I might want to buy one too. So
it's a legit,
the excitement is high.
No, that's well put. And it's a legit lifestyle thing too, where like all these brands want to be like lifestyle brands, if you will. Well, the Bronco is something you could go anywhere, do anything. Same with Jeep. And I think so many brands try to achieve that with their launches and with their messaging. Well, with Bronco, that's actually true. And then you add in the fact that it's a cool vehicle. There you go. Okay, so let's talk about the trim. Zach, you did a nice piece that kind of walked through all the different ways you could get one. Your line is pretty great. The party starts at $29,995, which is a basic Bronco, which I actually love the look of the basic Bronco. Those dog dish headlights and just, really basic, nothing else going on. I would prefer to get the upgraded headlights and just some other things. But for me, as I was looking at the lineups, less is more, I would probably take a more basic trim and then try and add as much a la carte on as I could, which is tough to do sometimes. We haven't seen a full configurator for the Bronco yet. There is one for the Bronco Sport, which we are going to talk about in a second here. But yeah, I actually often found when I was trying to find my favorite Wrangler, it was tough for me to get exactly what I wanted because they always wanted to upsell me into a trim of stuff I didn't need. So, I mean, for your life, what model, what trim would you guys go with?
It is an extremely tough question that I still honestly don't know the answer to. Like you said, there are a lot of trims. There are 6 trims to start with, and then there's a first edition to make it a 7th trim for the first year. Honestly, one of the more attractive packages to me is the Big Bend, just because it's still, in the realm of being cheap. With a 2-door, it's still under $35,000. You get a few niceties here and there, and on top of that, you can do the Sasquatch package, which actually is a weird pain point right now because you can't get the manual and the Sasquatch package. So I would really, really be debating whether I go for that Sasquatch package with the big wheels and the special final drive ratio, Bilstein shocks, higher clearance suspension, and cool fender flares. But honestly, yeah, I mean, I think that I would take the manual over that and probably just go with some aftermarket parts eventually if I wanted to do anything crazy. Honestly, for my lifestyle, I'm not a huge off-roader. If I had an off-roader, I would probably be out there hitting the trails because, well, the Bronco looks like it's going to be extremely capable. But, it would be Big Bend for me with the 7-speed manual.
Sounds pretty good. You have any thoughts on this, James?
Yeah, so just looking through all of them right now, the Sasquatch package is a good point because it pretty much adds all of the top-of-the-line Badlands stuff to any of the trim levels, minus the disconnecting stabilizer bar. That's really the only thing. So you don't have to spend $46,000 to get a fully capable, off-road ready Bronco, and they're all off-road ready, but the especially ones. Yeah, and I kind of agree with you. The Big Bend kind of looks like the right blend there. Maybe Black Diamond, because that adds a couple of extra cool styling things. The heavy-duty steel bumpers, the rock rails, the bash plate. Like if you want like the Bronco to look kind of badass, that's kind of a good way to do it without going fully Badlands. On the other hand, though, the interior of the Outer Banks looks really, really cool with that natural look leather in it. It looks like a baseball glove. It literally looks like the baseball glove I'm looking at in my garage right now. It's just really it's really special inside, and as you know, the Wrangler was rightly praised for how nice of an interior it has, both in terms of materials and just the quality. The materials quality as well as the characterful design, and this also delivers on that, of course. But this is one of those things that we need to look at in person, because it's easy to take a really nice, pretty picture and make hard plastic look good. So that's one thing we'll have to wait to see it in person.
I think I might follow maybe as an Outer Banks person myself. I think for me, I really do like the way like in real life, in person, I feel like you kind of might need to step up to that, whereas the basic trim might look a little tired compared to how some people are going to spec them out. You know, you often see this with like cars that are really like, you know, they're so exciting. People really want them. And you tend to see people maybe buy like the lesser equipped ones, like the SE model, if you will, just so they could say they own XYZ car. But then you're like, oh, well, a base level, say something, something. And then you look at like a mid or an upper level. It's like, oh, geez, that's how the car is really supposed to look. I don't think that'll totally be the case here. I think a basic Bronco is still going to look pretty good.
Well, I guess to that point, is it's not just like the ladder of equipment. So there's also visual differences here. So like Outer Banks has more body-colored door handles, mirrors, and fender flares, whereas Black Diamond has the black fender flares. It has those really awesome black steel wheels, which really look good in photos. But if the Toyota FJ Cruiser is any indication, no one will get them. Everyone will get alloy wheels, because black steel wheels looked really awesome on the FJ Cruiser, and nobody really. I have never seen them outside of a press photo from 2007. So
yeah, it's like with the Jeep Gladiator too. You could get those really basic steelies, but you almost never see them. And frankly, I mean, and they can go either way. It's like this thing that I think I'd want. Like it's almost like that like military look. But then you see him on the road and you're like, oh, is that guy running on like his flat, donut tire or something? Like what's going on there? So
by the way, speaking of donut tires, make a point, everyone, to look at the tires on the Bronco Wildtrak, because I just looked at them. They are hilariously huge. They are balloony. That's the Wildtrak is the kind of the high-speed desert runner one, and the tires are epic on it. That's not going to be loud inside at all. No.
Yeah, that's like straight out of like Las Vegas, like the SEMA show or something.
Bigfoot.
Yeah. Those have got to be the big 35 inchers.
Well, it's the Wildtrak. Well, yeah, I don't know if those are the same ones that are on the Badlands, but they're pretty epic. Make sure to check out the Wildtrak. That's the the big motor one. Well, you can get the big motor on other ones, but yeah.
I just, for me, it's like the wheels and the headlights really are what two of the real signature features here. So I'll be excited to spec one of these things out once they finally get that out. Maybe by the time you're listening to this, they'll have this up. Usually car companies get it out pretty quick. And I thought briefly there was even some chatter on Twitter that it was up, but then it was like crashing or something. So maybe by the time you listen to this, you'll be able to do it. Do you want to tell everybody what the heck a Sasquatch package is, though? I feel like the world needs to know that. Maybe just dive into that real quick there, Zach.
Yeah, so the Sasquatch package, one of the best ways to describe it is almost like a Rubicon Light package. If you're familiar with the Jeep Wrangler Rubicon, it's not as intense of that, but you get 17-inch beadlock capable wheels, 35-inch mud terrain tires, electronic locking front and rear axles, the 4.7-to-1 final drive ratio, the Bilstein position-sensitive shocks, a high-clearance suspension, and the high-clearance fender flares that allow you to have those 35-inch giant tires underneath there. So I don't believe that there's a price on the package yet, but it will be, I imagine, one of the more common items that people tack on because, well, it makes the Bronco look extremely badass with those tires, and it obviously gives you a lot of the Badlands equipment, like James mentioned. So you can chuck that on the base Bronco, and all of a sudden you have a very cheap, basic Bronco with all of the off-road capability that you can probably use on any kind of a trail, which is really awesome because you cannot get that much capability with the super, super cheap levels of a Wrangler. There's no equivalent package that really chucks on all of that intense off-roading gear like Ford's doing here.
Really smart play by Ford. I feel like they kind of looked at, like, they've had so much time to study their opponent that they were able to find weaknesses, cracks, and like how Jeep does things that Jeep has probably never really had to look at because they haven't had any competition.
Yep.
And now they do. So let's talk about the Bronco Sport, which is something we were kind of, I think you said this, maybe even Monday night, like, wow, hey, this thing's really cool too. In addition to the fact, that the Bronco is, of course, returning. The Bronco Sport is more of a Jeep Compass type fighter. It's definitely in more of a daily driver is probably the wrong word, but more of like a crossover that you would definitely use as it's intended for everyday use, but still has plenty of capability. It's got a lot of the looks. It offers a number of intriguing different options and packages. You can spec one of these out as we're recording this on a rainy Thursday afternoon. And again, this kind of did get lost in the shuffle. We're saying, gosh, I hope it doesn't get lost. And then, we spent half an hour here talking about the Bronco and we'll just tack this on. But this is really cool, I think. I'm interested to hear what you guys think.
Yeah, so the Bronco Sport, you're absolutely right. There was even less information shared about this in Ford's own presentation. But here's the thing with Bronco Sport. It would be easy to kind of dismiss this as just the light crossover thing that kind of looks like a Bronco but is really just an Escape. It's kind of, you can easily look at it cynically, and I think a lot of people were doing that when spy photos were coming out. And it would have been very easy just for them to develop it as such, just to make a boxier Ford Escape that kind of looked like a Bronco, and sure, raise it a bit. But no, actually, one thing I'm really impressed with is the amount of kind of the design, that advanced, interesting, newfangled design process they went about for the regular Bronco. They did on Bronco Sport as well, but they identified a different type of buyer. So a Wrangler is bought, there's hardcore off-roaders and, people who are going to use it. But the thing is, just because you don't do like hardcore off-roading with your SUV doesn't mean you don't actually use it outdoors. You're not going to go to the Rubicon Trail, but you're actually going to go to a campsite. You are going to spend time outdoors. And to that point, Ford kind of aimed at those people, of which I know, like, all of my friends here in Portland go places on weekend. They actually get their cars dirty. And almost all of them own Subarus. You look around my neighborhood and everybody has different racks on their roof. I have neighbors who have a Wrangler and they have a different rack on their roof every weekend. You know, kayaks some weekend. They have the roof carrier others. Bike racks, stand-up paddleboard, like all this stuff. The REI crowd. This is who the Ford Bronco Sport, this is who they were aiming for. And not just aiming for, but actually working with people who live this lifestyle, this kind of Instagram-friendly lifestyle, but it's real. And so they came up with, you know, just kind of simple solutions, but they're very thoughtful, such as putting like molly straps on the back of the seats, starting with the Big Ben trim, so you can just attach whatever you want, kind of like that are on army backpacks. There's a zippered thing on the back of on the front seats as well. The lift gate has large bars along its edge, both to make it very easy to pull down, but it's designed to double as a hanging rack for a towel, for some shorts or whatever. There's also 2 very bright LED floodlights in the tailgate that can bathe up to 129 square feet around the back of your car, which my neighbors did point out to me they would actually find very useful. That's just standard stuff. Then there's accessories. There's a cargo management system that has kind of a table that can provide a tiered loading floor that the Nissan Rogue has and the Honda CR-V used to have. But then it can also extend out somewhat and create a workstation behind your workstation, kind of like a camp table, something like that. The roof racks, they are serious, chunky, serious things, just like you would get on a Subaru. They are rated to be able to carry one of those rooftop tents that you see in the photos, and people actually do have. If you notice, there's like this, quote, safari roofline indicative of an old Land Rover Discovery. And, you know, it kind of looks cool. It adds extra cargo capacity because boxes are better in that regard. But it was also that high to specifically be able to mount 2 27.5-inch mountain bikes inside. Because apparently they were doing market research and they found that when people have their very expensive mountain bikes, there is a security concern about just mounting them to a hitch-mounted bike rack. And also, you know, mounting a mountain bike to the top of an SUV, especially a taller one like this, is a pain in the ass. Like lifting it up there, but being able to secure it inside could make a difference for folks. And it's a rack designed by Yakima. And in fact, a lot of these accessories were made in conjunction with Yakima and Thule. And there's over 100 of them. And so it was designed with the idea that for people who have all this outdoorsy gear, and this vehicle that they buy would be well integrated to be kind of the ultimate piece of that gear and to integrate with all the gear that they have. And I mean, a lot of this kind of sounds like marketing mumbo jumbo, but like looking at what they actually created for the thing, it sure looks like they legitimately tried to deliver for those people. Again, of course, we haven't used this thing, so maybe it doesn't all work that well. We still have to include that caveat. But in terms of the actual interior functionality of it, which, you know, it really does deliver. And then there's actually the mechanical bits about it, that it has very impressive ground clearance that exceeds the Jeep Cherokee Trailhawk and Compass Trailhawk and those Subarus, admittedly by 1/10 of an inch and only on the Badlands. But even the base ones, they're 7.5 inches off the ground. That's pretty good. There's good approach departure angles, yada yada. It has a torque vectoring rear diff, the Badlands all-wheel drive system. The base one, we didn't really know much about what the standard all-wheel drive system is. They're calling it 4x4, but dude, it's everything looks like it's just an all-wheel drive system, which is totally fine. for this is a crossover. And the powertrains look impressive too. Good, they're the base engine's is a turbo triple, 181 horsepower, 190 pound-feet of torque, which given its size should be more than capable. And then the Badlands has the big motor, 245 horsepower, 275 pound-feet of torque. The fact that it's only available on the Badlands, I think, is a little disappointing. Having it as an option throughout the lineup, I think, would have been a good idea. So, guys, what do you think? I've now rambled on for long enough.
Yeah. So, I mean, this one to me, you're walking into the Ford dealership and you're like, okay, there's the Escape or there's this Bronco Sport that I could buy. And, I mean, to me, I'm going to take the Bronco Sport, I think, every single time. I mean, it looks about 20 times better than the new Escape does. I mean, they're based off the same chassis. Obviously, the Bronco Sport is, strengthened in some ways that I'm not sure of yet to handle, actual off-roading. But just the design of the Bronco Sport really has me won over the Escape pretty much every single day, and it's really not much more expensive. Like if you put all of the luxury options and the 2-liter turbo on an Escape, you're looking at $40,000 plus. I know that we had one in the office not too long ago that was exactly that, and the Bronco Sport is priced right there. I believe the first edition, which is the Badlands plus all of the luxury equipment, comes in just under $40,000. So it seems about priced right there to, if you want like a car-like experience, go for the Escape. If you want something that, probably is going to look better to a huge amount of the crossover crowd that goes out and wants something rugged looking, then there's that Bronco Sport now too. So it feels like a very smart move from Ford to introduce that and play off that platform and then give it, a look that people are actually, drawn to. It's based off of, the big 2-door and 4-door Bronco. You look at that grille and you're like, yeah, okay, you absolutely know where that came from. And now you can have a bit of that flavor with comfort, a little bit more luxury. And it seems like a smart move that, maybe introducing it at the same time as a Bronco, it obviously gets overshadowed. We think it's pretty cool, but obviously all of the attention is on that big Bronco right now.
The interesting point there, I absolutely agree with you relative to the Escape, because if it outsells Escape by 5-1, I will not be surprised, because I think the current Escape is a little underwhelming, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
But so a couple of points, the differences between the two. The dimensions actually are quite different. The Bronco Sport is narrower. Its wheelbase is like 1.5 inches shorter, and the overall length is like 8 inches shorter, which in car terms is quite significant, to the point that the Bronco Sport is actually considered a subcompact SUV. Kind of like in the Subaru Crosstrek size category, like something like that. Now, we don't have interior dimensions, so we don't know how that translates into its actual interior space. So maybe that will knock some people out of the running just because it just doesn't have enough, say, family-friendly rear-facing car seat space inside, and an Escape would be better for them. Same thing with cargo capacity, because even if the number is bigger for the Bronco Sport, a lot of that could be the result of the fact that it's a great big box, and a lot of its extra space is up high, which is great for a television, but not so great for just your luggage going away for the weekend. So that is one interesting bit about the comparisons between the two. But in the end, if this kills the Escape, I wouldn't be shocked. How much more of an impress. I like the idea of the car-based crossover one and the off-roady one. That in theory makes sense. But I think the Bronco Sport is so much more successful at its goal than the Escape is, that for that reason it'll just completely overshadow Escape.
Yeah, I think it's going to be tricky here to have two vehicles that are just so close to one another. I think it's also a situation where, you may get people who like are really going to like think out what they need, and that's where they might land on the Escape because of the size difference. If you're buying purely on emotion, to echo what you guys said, I don't see how you don't get the Bronco Sport. This to me is like the small compact Land Rover that Land Rover should have been trying to build. That's how good I think it looks. They do capture the essence of the big Bronco in a smaller package, to use that sort of cliche. But it looks really cool. And all the things that they put onto it or offer to it, again, we'll have to see if they work. But this is where if you're Subaru, if you're Jeep, you start to get a little nervous because you're like, oh, wow. I could definitely see buyers, perhaps in Denver, in Portland, in Maine, who may not lean Ford, although random sub note, Maine is actually surprisingly Ford country along with Subaru. But I could see them saying, well, we're not going to get this big Bronco thing. That's not who we are. That's not what we want. We're cross-shopping our Subarus, and they come across a Bronco Sport, and they're like, well, wait a minute. What's that? That's cool. Wait, it could do all these things? Oh, all right. So it definitely could make, I think, a big contribution. I do sort of feel like as the dust settles, people might sort of come home to the Escape a little bit, just because people do buy these crossovers because they need to do stuff. And I think if you're just random, like sort of commuter crossover buyer who needs to go to the grocery store, you might land on that versus the style play in the Bronco, especially if you're not doing all of the outdoorsy things. But I don't know. Pure emotion, yeah, Bronco Sport looks great. Another, not to be too negative here, but when I look at the prices, obviously the Bronco adds up quickly, and you're really not even going to get out of the gates below 45 grand on the Bronco, despite the fact you can get one under 30. Like literally adding like all kinds of any option, it starts to add up quickly. The Bronco is much more affordable for sure, but they do start about the same place. And right in that like 29 to like 42 sweet spot, where I do think you're going to have a lot of people who are, interested in getting a Bronco in some form. It's going to be tough, I think. I think it does have the same name, which is a good thing. But to go back to even the original part of this discussion, we've talked for half the show about the big Bronco, and we're tacking on this other car that we're like exclaiming how cool it is. But it can't help but be overshadowed. We called it the baby Bronco like 2 years ago when we first sort of got into what it might be. So I would just say, I think this is going to be another success for them. I think it's going to do well. I personally am really intrigued by it and think it's a brilliant play to actually take the fight to like Subaru and Jeep with a vehicle like this. Again, the Jeep Compass, the Jeep Cherokee, that's another market that Jeep has really had a good handle on it. They don't necessarily own it sales-wise, but they're always in the like consideration for people who are looking for vehicles that size and then have that outdoorsy bent. So I think it's great for Ford to get in the conversation. We'll see. I do have concerns that this vehicle will get lost in the shuffle a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that's the other thing is to the Escape Bronco Sport thing. The other comparison is not just between those two, but so the Escape, sure, you could go, okay, I don't really need the off-roady thing. I'm not really doing outdoorsy thing. So yeah, I'm going to go towards the Escape. But with an Escape, you could also get a Honda CR-V instead, or a Toyota RAV4, or any of these other competitors that are superior to it. Bronco Sport, though, does not have that same sort of obvious apples-to-apples competitive set. It's doing things that others are not. Even if it is an answer to a Compass, for example, I would be shocked if it doesn't do a better job than a Compass. And, like Subaru is catering, this is what the REI crowd is buying currently, but Subaru doesn't do all that extra, like, mile stuff. It is just inherently useful. But it doesn't, like, have these little clever bits that might, that might go that little extra mile. They don't look like anything that the Bronco Sport does. So that's one thing I'd kind of tack on there in terms of the comparison between the two.
I know that Ford, I mean, they've said there's going to be at least 100 aftermarket, like factory-backed accessories that is going to be on the Bronco Sport. I'd have to look up the numbers on Subaru, but you can almost put it in the books that they're going to have more options for those kind of people that you're talking about there, James, the REI crowd. And I mean, same thing with the big Bronco. I think that's already, they said, over 200 available at launch. So you can kit these things out. I mean, if you cannot find the item that you're looking for, you can almost guarantee that the aftermarket will make it, or Ford will have somebody make it soon.
To contradict myself a little bit, I think because this is a little bit segment busting, it could be, it's sort of this, gosh, I'm speaking in cliches today. It's sort of like an X factor. It's like, it's somebody who could play 3 or 4 different positions. It could fit in a bunch of different ways that could be a real asset, because they could be like, okay, you want the Bronco? Here's the Bronco. You want the Escape? Here it is. You want one of these other SUVs we make? Here we go. But here's this other thing. It's this size. It could do all these things. It's priced this way. You tell us, does this meet your needs? So I can see that actually, that's where it could perhaps really be an asset in some ways, is it's instead of Ford defining it, you go to the consumer and you say, well, what do you want it to be? And it could be that. And I think that's a great thing. So that's a lot of Bronco talk. Let's move along. Hey, also, we are going to have even more Bronco coverage. So check out Autoblog. Keep coming back to us. Just because the vehicles have been revealed, it doesn't stop there. James just wrote something that went up about we obsessively covered the Bronco. So you can check that out. It just, if this is Saturday, this is Sunday, you want to go back and read a little bit more about what trim, what might hit your lifestyle, how you would buy one, how you actually can buy one. Just going back to the website, we'll have all this stuff there. It's going to be there. It's going to be there forever. But, if you're listening to this, you're like, man, the dog is tired of its walk. We're going home. I need to read up on this. Please do. So let's talk about what we've been driving. Not the Bronco yet, but Zach, you were in a BMW X3 plug-in. Take me through that.
So really switching gears here from, the off-road oriented SUVs to a plug-in hybrid crossover with actually a little bit of performance intentions on top of being pretty efficient. So yeah, this was the X3 xDrive 30e. So you get the 30i and it's just the gas engine, but the 30e is the plug-in hybrid. So this is new for the US this year. We haven't had an X3 with a plug yet. So you get a 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder and an electric motor. So that gas engine is fairly low power compared to the 2-liter turbo you'd get in the 30i. This one just has 180 horsepower from that gas engine alone, but combined with the electric motor, you're up to 288 horsepower and 310 pound-feet of torque. So it's not slow. It's actually, according to BMW, a tenth of a second quicker to 60 than the base 30i, and you really do feel that when you put your foot down, because you get that electric surge right off the line from all that torque from the electric motor. So that's pretty great when you're, obviously not trying to drive efficiently. When you are trying to take advantage of that battery pack in there, it's rated for 18 miles of range, according to the EPA. I actually did a bit of a range test myself. I drove it around it ranged from speed limits between 25 and 60 miles an hour, and I managed to get 20.9 miles before the gas engine kicked back on. And so that's just over the EPA range. Nothing crazy, but it is good to see that that real world range is there when you're driving around. When you do eventually run out of battery power, it's rated at 24 mpg, which is actually slightly less than a normal X3 with just the base 2-liter turbo, which is at 26 mpg. So you're definitely doing best with efficiency when you keep that battery charged. But if you do have that battery charged and you want to go have some fun too, which is something that not all plug-in hybrids are capable of doing these days, BMW has definitely made sure that you can still do that. Mine had all of the, M Sport dynamic handling packages on it, which actually made this thing, more fun than I expected it was going to be. So you get the BMW mode control with Sport, Sport Plus, Comfort, Adaptive modes. You get M Sport brakes. There's variable sport steering that I had on this one, plus 20-inch wheels with summer tires. This thing had a stupid amount of grip. It's 275 section width rears. I was actually out driving with a friend of mine. He had a Stelvio Quadrifoglio. That thing has 285 section width rear tires on it. So BMW is not messing around with the amount of rubber that they put on this thing, and it handles really, really well for a big crossover. The one disconcerting thing, if you are driving fast, the brake pedal tuning, not a huge fan of that. There are a lot of hybrids and plug-in hybrids that do it much better. This one is a fairly mushy brake that you get without much feel. Unfortunately, I was sort of surprised by that. In that the car handles so well, it actually goes semi quickly. But yeah, the brakes were not super inspired for confidence. And one thing that you do get with that dynamic handling package too is the adaptive M suspension, which makes a huge difference when you swap between comfort and sport. I found in a lot of X3s that I've driven, I have never driven an X3 with that adaptive suspension on it, and I've always found the tuning to be a bit harsh compared to, other crossovers in that segment, like a GLC or the Audi or an Acura RDX. BMW always tends to, stay on the performance handling side of things, but when I threw it in comfort, I was actually pretty surprised by how well it was able to soak up the speed bumps, potholes. It was very, very comfortable. And then you chuck it into sport, and the thing handles. So, I mean, at the end of the day, you're looking at about a $6,500-ish price increase for that plug-in hybrid over just the base 30i, but you're also getting a $5,800 tax credit if you buy the plug-in hybrid, which almost completely negates that extra, price that you pay for the hybrid. And it's hard to say no to that when the performance, other than the brakes, I think, is there for all intents and purposes. It drives like a regular BMW crossover, even when you're on full electric mode. It has a decent amount of giddy up when you throw it in Max E and put your foot down. So yeah, you can drive 18 miles. If this is the kind of car that would work for somebody who has a shorter commute, you wouldn't have to, put gas in it very often throughout the week. And you can get all the luxury items on top of it too. BMW's not holding anything back there. The full executive, their full driver assistance system, all the great iDrive features, you're not missing anything. So, yeah, great little plug-in hybrid crossover.
One thing I like about that vehicle you mentioned is the 18 miles of range. I think that really makes it attractive to somebody who might be thinking, how can I add this like green vehicle to my lifestyle? Not sure what I want. It's still a BMW small crossover, so there's that obviously familiarity. But I mean, I live fewer than 18 miles from the office. That would fit great for my lifestyle. So I like that application. I think BMW, they could be more aggressive with some of their electrification efforts, but I'm certainly not going to criticize them when they do it, if you will. I think that's an interesting use. Any other thoughts on this? We'll keep our drives a little tighter this week since we've done, I'd say, a small homily on the Bronco, but any other thoughts on the BMW?
I think that you should absolutely consider it. Look at if you're going to get that $5,800 tax credit, it makes a lot of sense to go the plug-in hybrid route. Obviously that's not a super popular thing to do these days, but it's absolutely worth considering without the massive price bump that you get. It's sort of lessened because of that tax credit.
Yeah, well put. So speaking of hybrids, I was in the 2020 Hyundai Ioniq. I really liked it. It's a Prius fighter. Mine was in a kind of a crimson shade of orange, or red, excuse me, officially called Scarlet Red Pearl. Really nice car. The neighbors noticed it. One of my neighbors actually walked by and his dog kind of stopped and took it in and he called it the Ioniq. And I thought, wow, that sounds like a 1920s French cruise ship or something, and rolls off the tongue a little bit better than Ioniq. But I think it's solid. I enjoyed my week in it. I think it's a really good hybrid, and I think there's something to be said for that. 55 MPG, 55 city, 54 highway, so exactly almost even. And it's just like if you're looking for a really good hybrid, Hyundai's got some. Hyundai is, I think they really are aggressively going after, green customers. And I think it's tricky because I had a Prius like 2 weeks before this, and I like this better in almost every way than I liked the Prius. It was better. It looks cooler. The ratings are impressive. The interior was nicer. So, I mean, to me, it's like, wow. The tricky part, though, is if you don't know what this car is, you think it's just maybe a really nice Hyundai. So, whereas a Prius remains a Prius. It's like, for some people, it's like a watch or a sneaker or something. Maybe you could get a better watch versus a Rolex or something, or like the Nike swoosh, but you still want that name brand. I think there's certain people that always will need to drive the Prius, which I think has become a bit of a cartoonish version of itself to go that far. Like they've got some of those styling cues from that hydrogen vehicle that they rolled out 3 or 4 years ago. The name's escaping me. It reminds me a little bit of, yes, it's like it almost has fins. Like I don't even think that car looks all that good anymore. Whereas then the Ioniq arrives in my driveway and I'm like, yeah. I mean, to tell you how much I like this car, Zach was actually saying something like, hey, I can get you like a midweek swap if you want, just to change up your rotation. And I was like, no, man, I really want to drive the Hyundai Ioniq. I'm into this thing. And all I did was just errands and stuff, but it's the kind of daily driving hybrid that I think really is a solid vehicle for a lot of people. And mine only cost $32,000.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It really is just like a great little errand car. Because you get in, and here's the thing: the two elements to that. So yeah, it gets the fuel economy of the Prius, so that's cool. But two elements here: one, you get in, and it's normal. It is a pretty normal interior. It's not all weird and bizarre. The interior doesn't look like a toilet like it did in the white porcelain-looking thing in the Prius.
Just to be clear, you actually call the Prius interior a toilet?
The center console looked like a toilet. Okay. It looked like a white porcelain toilet. There's a reason they no longer offer
I just wanted to be clear.
There's a reason. Anyway, nice. So it's just normal. You know where everything is. You get in. Like my parents rented one on vacation in Scotland, and they got in and they knew how everything worked. I think that's pretty impressive. And then the other thing is it's surprisingly sporty. Like, yep. Especially compared to a Prius, which they've improved over the years, but dude, low bar. It actually has like responsive steering, and the chassis responds, and the low weight associated with putting the battery where it is. And when you're just driving those errands around town, like you don't need something that's like fully caffeinated, but something that at least acknowledges that we would care that you notice how this drives is actually appreciated. And that's what this car does that the Prius doesn't. So I fully concur. I have always enjoyed that car whenever I've got it, and I think it deserves more attention than it gets.
One final thought on the Ioniq, and this is this is laudable. Hyundai offers this in a plug-in, a full electric, and just a regular, if you will, hybrid. And they're all relatively affordable, I think, which is very impressive. They're all
good
range
too.
of the
They're all good too.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you could, in the range of the full electric is 170 on pure, obviously, electricity. I think I would probably fall on the plug-in hybrid just to get that. The tax credit is $4,500. So it's like, I don't know, man. I think this is one of those untold stories where it's like, yeah, you can get some pretty cool green cars in a segment. Maybe cool isn't the right word, but things that do what they want. Like, I hate to bust out the appliance analogy, but this is like something that works exactly how the like quote unquote segment is designed to work. It's a really good hybrid, or it's a really good plug-in, or a really good full electric. And I guarantee you most people aren't like, man, I think I want a hybrid. Ooh, let's get a Prius. Oh, wait, Hyundai offers a direct competitor. Nobody knows that. So I think that's something that if you're, cross-shopping Priuses, pre-I, check out an Ioniq, if you will.
One thing I would say to this is, the kind of buyer this is? This like if we needed to go to, like say we're driving to work every day. We have to go 9 miles. It's like a totally mind-sucking commute, whatever. Get an Ioniq. It's like you get in, it's responsive enough to drive, it's really affordable. You get in, you know where everything works, and then save a bunch of money on that, and then buy something fun for the weekend, something old and fun. And if it sucks a lot of gas, doesn't matter that much because you're not driving it that much, and you've saved all this gas during the week driving your plug-in Ioniq. So, like, for folks like that, which I think if I drove to work every day as opposed to sitting in my office writing about cars, I think it would make I think this is the type of car that totally makes sense for that 2-car, maintaining your automotive enthusiasm while still not sucking gas and being a total burden on the environment on a day-to-day basis.
So speaking of that, what would you do with a Ford Expedition?
Well, speaking of which, 19.2 miles per gallon on my road trip, which is exactly the EPA number.
Wow.
So the Expedition, Ford Expedition, in many ways, it's wildly impressive in terms of the space that it provides. This isn't just some big honkin' heavy SUV that you buy because it looks like a big honkin' heavy SUV, cough, Chevrolet Tahoe. Because inside this thing, I am 6'3", and I legitimately, very comfortably sit in the third row of this vehicle, in a seat that reclines. That I'm not like sitting on the floor. It's a chair. The second row is way nicer, is way more comfortable, kind of for the same reasons, than all of the 3-row crossovers in the world. Like, there is a legitimate like comfort and space benefit to buying a Ford Expedition, both in terms of crossovers as well as all of the current selection of the full-size SUVs, with an asterisk being I haven't been in a new Tahoe. In terms of the cargo space, there's actually a fair amount of cargo space behind that third row seat, and with the Expedition Max available, it expands it even more. The third row remains the same in that vehicle, unlike in the Tahoe Suburban, but rather just adds a whole bunch of useful cargo space behind that. The other thing about this is it has a ton of power, 375 horsepower, 470 pound-feet of torque from the 3.5-liter turbo V6. Yes, it weighs as much as the Lusitania. However, that's more than enough to still make it feel a lot quicker than all of those 3-row crossovers. It's kind of shocking. The other thing is it's very smooth. It's very quiet. So it's not that really gruff, loud, big rig sounding V8 engine. Really, when it's just kind of purring along on the highway, you don't hear it at all. If you actually hear the whoosh of the turbocharger coming in under throttle, which is pretty cool. And it's actually available with the 400 horsepower version in the Platinum, I can't imagine, like, that is totally unnecessary. So kudos to them for putting it in. And really, when you look at it, like 19 miles per gallon is actually like pretty good, given the fact that an Armada with way less power gets only 15, or a Sequoia with 14. And when you're talking about like low MPG numbers, that is a colossal difference in terms of the amount of fuel you're using. At the same time, though, it is enormous. Like, I was able to load our weekend away with the dogs, with all of our food and supplies, because we weren't going to go out for obvious reasons. I could have put that into like a Palisade or a Ford Flex, for instance. It would, in the same thing with the interior space. Like, you don't really need all that much. And, they've done a masterful job about making the suspension comfortable for a full-size truck-based SUV, but you still get that constant vibration over bumps, and on slower speeds, you do have pretty significant impacts felt. Like, you really need to have this much space to really justify it, because, there is still reasons to think twice, because it's still relative compared to a third row crossover, way more and way thirstier than you need.
One thing I'm curious is Expedition or Navigator for you?
Well, it's the price thing, because I think I would, price no issue. I would rather have the swank mid-century modern awesomeness that's the Navigator Black Label, but that's like pushing $100,000. And this one I have, the King Ranch, is like $76,000, which, holy crap, that is very expensive. But it's not $100,000. No, but you can get a Navigator starting in that price range too. So, and it has a nicer interior, even if you don't get the fancy blue one. So they're pretty similar in that regard. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It's kind of how I feel too, to be perfectly honest. Like, I actually kind of like the Expeditions, like headlights and that like squared off look. I think it's kind of a cool look. Like, the Navigator, I really like the Navigator, and the interior, yes, is decadent and gorgeous in a mid-century modern type of way that, only Lincoln seems to be doing really well. But I don't know, there's part of me that's also kind of like, I don't know. I mean, the Expedition has more of a little bit of an appeal to it, in the fact that, like, I think there's still a little bit of you really want to drive a Lincoln, not in like, well, yeah, kind of in a bad way. I mean, Lincoln's got like that, like, Buick sort of stigma attached to it, where you don't drive this car unless you're like, you were born in the Taft administration or something. So
yeah, that's an interesting point. And actually, I mentioned the Navigator interior. I said nothing about the exterior, which I actually think has been generally overrated over the years. And the Expedition looks genuinely good. Like, I walked it up and it's both between this was a King Ranch. So this, like, used to be like the gaudy, like, yeehaw model for unless you're wearing cowboy boots, like, this is not for you. But I don't, and I do really like it. I think it's actually quite tasteful. I like the interior color scheme. There's not a bunch of gaudy logos everywhere. They've kept the chrome down. Whoever's running Ford's truck design right now has an elevated taste level that previously wasn't there. Both the new F-150 images we've seen, like, that is not over the top chrome central. There's, like, it's tasteful and actually surprisingly restrained, and they're doing a really good job.
All right, so that's the Ford Expedition. Let's move along to something called Stellantis. Stellantis. This is what our news segment is this week. Normally it's more like something new car, something industry news, something Elon Musk. No, this week Chrysler, which is actually FCA, Fiat Chrysler Automobiles, based in the Netherlands, for those of you who may not know that, with an office in London, is actually formally going to call itself Stellantis after it completes its merger with PSA, which is in simple terms Peugeot.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well,
I don't even know where to begin here.
Yeah.
I was off yesterday. I wake up this morning and I'm like, Chrysler's Stellantis? Seriously?
Well,
take it from there.
Yeah, so here's the thing. Let's talk about the reason this was done, which is a perfectly valid reason, is because FCA, Fiat Chrysler Automobiles, is merging with Peugeot Group PSA, which is French. Okay, so you can't call the thing Peugeot, Citroën, Fiat, Chrysler, Jeep, Dodge, whatever else remnant of Imperial. Like you can't do that. That's ridiculous. So you're going to come up with a new name. Okay, well, as it's Fiat and Peugeot, it's French and Italian, and the Europeans are pretty good about coming up with names that aren't really either language but work for either language. And so in that case, Latin, right? Common Latin is the common origin of both Italian and French. We're going to come up with something that evokes astronomy, so Stello, and boom, let's go with Stellantis. That sounds right, doesn't it? Yes, sure. So the Italians and the French, they come up with this in their wonderful European way, and apparently they didn't care or even think to ask what Chrysler might want to do in America. Probably concerned that they would name it Hellcat or Revenge Seeker or Predator Drone or something really cool and awesome. So they didn't ask the people in the U.S. They just left them to the Jeeps and the Hellcats. And in the end, we get Stellantis. Remember remember to ask your doctor before using Stellantis. It's just a good idea. But otherwise, that's how Stellantis came about, everybody. So there. But don't worry, there's not going to be a Stellantis Challenger. That's not going to be a thing.
So after I was super down on it, but also tongue in cheek. I mean, as I think about it and as I've looked at it, sure, it's fine. You know, when you look at it, what the name really is this is like the name that is this ubiquitous be all end all for a holding company. That's what it is. Your Jeep Wrangler is still going to be called the Jeep Wrangler. Your Hellcat's still going to be a Hellcat. So in that sense, it's all right. I mean, let's take a step back. This is the company that was at once owned by Cerberus, named after a three-headed dog from hell. So,
which is pretty indicative of the company that actually owned them. So that's, yeah.
Yes, that's very true. Wouldn't it be ironic now, the greatest, just, I don't know, if they named one of their cars like the Dodge Challenger Cerberus or something? Because that name fits the cars they're making now. Yeah. I don't know. I'm okay with it. I mean, to go back to our various historical references we've dropped in here, what does the Stellantis not sound like the Lusitania's sister ship or something like that? Like, this is a throwback name from when they used to name things like crazy, like after constellations for ocean liners and like train lines and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I don't know.
You know, it could be this or some useless acronym. I mean, FCA always sounded like I was never in love with that. But I mean, Stellantis does kind of sound like either like a cruise ship or something like the name of the submersible in the movie The Abyss, or just like an evil corporation.
Yes,
and
definitely.
In a way, maybe it is, but it's it's an international conglomerate. So,
one thing that I was thinking about last night, like, would we be talking about this at all if it was just some like weird acronym that made no sense? It's like, oh, okay, it's FCA, PSAC. All right, cool, move on. But here we are talking about Stellantis for like 10 minutes.
So and that means they've won.
Just you saying it is funny. Like Stellantis.
Like, who will actually? I don't know. I mean, so many people know what Stellantis is that would have never known what Stellantis was if it was like some weird acronym at this point now, and they've made a huge news splash.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about it for 10 minutes. That means this works. This worked. It's Stellantis.
honestly.
It makes it sound so much cooler than it is, though, in a way. It's just a multinational conglomerate.
We're talking about the company that makes minivans and like Citroens. I mean, I will say this, Chrysler, I think they're being legit here. They're saying this 6-headed monster of a company is going to be, so they say, a legit like singular entity, and we're going to call it something. If you keep doing the FCA, PSA, any other brand that wants to be on there, it's not. It's just like this, like, empire of different brands. But by saying, no, we're Stellantis, okay, you're Stellantis, So I don't know. Part of me wonders how this plays in Torino and Paris. I mean, in Auburn Hills, I don't think they care that much. Chrysler's had so many names, whatever.
Actually, the other one that just dawns on me is Opel. So GM's old European division is also in this stuff. This is just like it's really quite something.
This is like the most interesting company in the world when I think about it. Like literally every country, like in Western Europe and the United States is represented here. Like, I mean, I don't know, guys. What can go wrong?
You're right.
I mean, NATO.
You're right, because it's not just Opel; it's Vauxhall, which is British.
Right.
They're in there too. They're just missing.
NATO agrees on everything, right, guys? They get everything right. I see no problems with this model.
Yeah. I just really want a Citroen Cactus Hellcat. I think we can all just hope for that. Citroen Cactus Trailhawk. That sounds cool.
Tuned by Opel in Germany.
Yeah, I want a Dodge Challenger with a Citroen 1.2 liter 3-cylinder that produces 98. Oh no, I don't want that. Wait, no, that's a bad. So we're gonna give them more. Admittedly, we're gonna give them more. Okay.
Wow, that was like another Stellantis monologue. All right. Well, why don't we transition to, instead of spending some money today, we're going to go do like a retro drive. You guys spent some time in cars from back when Chrysler was just Daimler Chrysler. Simple, easy back then. That was 98. This is 99. Prelude and a Civic Si. Let's lead off with the Prelude.
All right, yeah. So, I mean, we both had cars that had next to no miles on them for their age. Mine, I believe, had about 2,600 miles on it. 1999 Honda Prelude Type SH. So I'm a huge Honda geek just because I've owned an Acura Integra since I was 15 years old. So this was pretty much one of the coolest things that could ever arrive in my driveway. I'm sure that you were similarly geeked by seeing that Civic Si with about no miles on it, James. But no, I mean, it was a trip back in time, as though you're driving this 20-year-old car that is brand new. You get in and there's no wrinkles in the leather, there's no marks on anything. Every last thing works. It sounds and runs like a top. The steering feels brand new. It was a beautiful, beautiful few days, honestly, and I was sort of conflicted in that I wanted to like keep driving this thing, like I didn't want to stop driving, but also like this thing has 2,600 miles on it. Like I don't want to put on a bunch of miles because Honda's over here. Like this is our historical museum piece. That's literally where it's been, in a Honda museum. And they just broke it out and let us play around with it. I loved it. What did you think about your 99 Civic Si, James? My girlfriend actually owns one of those, and it has just over 100,000 miles on it.
Oh,
so
okay,
yeah.
so 100,000 more than this one had. So I actually come about this from a different way, because I got my driver's license in 1999, and so this was kind of the same era that my first car was, and I never even considered getting a Civic Si. I never, at the time reading about it, I didn't know what the big deal was. I liked the Electron blue paint. That was pretty cool, and I acknowledged that it was a more performance-oriented version, but it still only had like 160 horsepower. It didn't look all that different from the regular Civic. So I was like, what is the big deal? So 20 years later, it ends up in my garage, and to the point of it's a museum piece is really something, because it is one link. It was weird to open up my garage and there's just like, it's like stepping through a time portal, which is weird because I'm currently sitting in that garage in a car that's a year older than this thing. And the thing that's weird is it's a Civic. So yeah, besides the paint, you look at it, it's like, yeah, that's a Honda Civic. That's a regular car that's brand new. And it's 20 years later. Like, this is a weird cognitive thing going on, and it just never stopped. Every time I opened the garage, it was super weird. And then the car itself, you get in, and honestly, the initial response is, yeah, I was kind of right 20 years ago. You get in, and you're like, this is a regular Civic. It's very slow off the line. It has 111 pound-feet of torque at 7,000 RPM, which might as well just be like 12 torques. Like, it's just not, it does not move. The steering is very slow, and it's numb on center, and the turn-in is not very precise. And so initially, kind of underwhelming. But you do need to drive it, and you get out of town, and you get on the mountain road, and you realize that, oh wait, I'm shifting at 6,000 RPM here, and it's really loud, but there's 2,000 more RPM to go, which is nuts. And you do, and the engine just changes, because that's VTEC. It's literally changing, and the experience complete is totally different. The car comes alive. It suddenly feels zesty and exciting. Does it feel fast? Not really. But it's like you suddenly get it. The shifter 5-speed manual transmission is brilliant. It is easy to heel-toe downshift, unlike the current Civic Si, which is actually quite difficult because they put the pedals too damn far away from separated from each other. Also, the throttle response in the new car, I don't think it's just turbocharger. I think they've just totally just neutered it. It's mush, not just compared to this to the old one. But you suddenly fully appreciate that double wishbone suspension that's on the car that feels very sophisticated, especially for an old car like it is. And then the upgrades that they made to the Civic Si, it's 25% stiffer up, the springs are. It has progressive rate shocks. They stiffened it in various places, and you really feel that. And when you really get the car moving, all of a sudden you start to appreciate it more. The steering gets better, by the way, when you go faster. And it kind of speaks to the sleeper nature of that car, because you needed to, not only did you need to know what it is to appreciate it, like you could have to understand what VTEC and the electron blue paint signified, but to my original point of not getting it 20 years ago, you have to actually drive it, and you have to drive it hard, not just like a putter around the block. Like, you have to drive it to fully appreciate it. And that's what I learned with my time in the Civic Si, that I wouldn't have known 20 years ago. So it really was, it was cool from a historic perspective. It was cool from a trip down memory lane to see this old car that just would have been like my buddy's Civic back in the day. And then from actually, like an actually fun car to drive that's clearly different than anything that's made today. It was a really special experience.
No, like the way that you described that driving experience, James, you know, it's a lot of the same things. You could say almost exactly for this Prelude Type SH. One thing that was special with this Prelude, though, because it was the Type SH, it has the active torque transfer system, which is a pretty awesome little torque vectoring system that Honda pioneered on this car. And, you know, it was pretty hot stuff back in the day. You basically were able to, eliminate a lot of understeer and make a front-wheel drive car not feel like a front-wheel drive car through the corners. And I had never driven any Prelude Type SH before. I was fairly blown away by how how much better this system made the car, especially compared to my Integra, where, if I'm on a tight, winding road or on a track, that front inside wheel is spinning up. And hey, that's understeer, not great. With the Prelude Type SH, that wasn't the case. Really, really cool technology there. And you have to be up in the rev range. I know, when I drive my girlfriend's Civic Si, nothing happens below 4,500 RPM. You almost have to just rev it up, past 3,000 RPM just to get it moving down the road. If you're cruising at like 80 miles per hour on the highway, you're over 4,000 RPM.
Oh, you're way over.
In fifth gear. It's almost kind of hilarious. And it's a similar thing with a Prelude, but not as much, just because that car has a 2.2 liter 4-cylinder versus your 1.6 liter. So a lot more torque with that, and also a lower red line too. This one only revs to 7,400 RPM. But the just having driven both cars, that VTEC crossover, when you get to that point, is it's a lot more audible and a lot more violent of a shove in the back in the Prelude than it is in, say, my Integra or that Civic Si. It's just a more intense experience, and that's the way that Honda has adjusted that over the years through the different engines. But no, like that raw, super raw feeling, hydraulic power steering, there's nothing interrupting between you and the road, and it's a beautiful, intimate throwback experience. The cars ain't fast, they're not quick cars, but God, they're so fun.
Yeah, I'm actually jealous because at the same year, right? So yeah. I did want a Prelude. I thought that was super cool, and it was that was just too much. I was very lucky, and I got a new car, when I got my license, and that was out of the price range. And I also discovered I like torque, so I ended up with a V6 powered Jetta. But the thing is, that is, if it was my money, and hey, let's talk about spending your money on an old Honda, since this is usually when we would be talking about that. I would get a Prelude. I would get the Prelude of this era rather than a Civic Si. The Civic Si is harder to find because they've all been trashed to high hell by tuners. So if you got not even this insane literal museum piece like this, but even I'd still get the Prelude. I think it looks more special. It looks cooler. The interior is nicer. Yada yada yada. Performance. It still is the superior car all these years, and so ultimately, while mine was an enjoyable, illuminating experience, I am nevertheless still jealous of your time.
Yeah, the Prelude is definitely more of a dedicated sports coupe than the Civic Si ever was. It has that shape, with it's almost a bit of a rear-wheel drive car shape to a certain extent.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Which is super unique for a front-wheel drive car. So that's extremely cool. The Prelude, while it's not it's not full of luxury features or anything like that, it is nicer inside than the Civic Si, and just all around, you have a longer wheelbase, it's more comfortable, and from the factory too, it was made a little bit sportier, just because the Prelude was the super focused sporty coupe from Honda at that time. Luxury plus sport. This is the best that you could get. So
yeah, and let's all lament that they don't make one today, because the Civic Si today is really good. It's really good, and I would love to see what they could do with a 2020 Honda Prelude. I think that car would be really cool. Hopefully, it would look better than a Civic Si. They go easy on the scoops, but I think that could be. I wish they would make one today. I don't think they will, but I wish they did.
Me too. I don't know how many people would buy it. Probably not a whole lot, but man, it would be awesome. You're right.
All right, so I think we'll leave it there. Sometimes it's like I don't even need to be here. You guys just carried that segment.
You mean you haven't been in a meeting for the last half hour? I thought.
Yeah, really. I could have. I've actually gone through. At this point, we're nearing the 90-minute mark of the podcast, which may be a record. I'm not sure.
Bronco.
At least in recent years.
Bronco marathon.
Bronco. I've gone through a pint glass of water, a wine glass of LaCroix, and a Paris mug that I think I actually got in Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport of coffee.
So what you're saying is you need to go to the bathroom.
You're hydrated.
I'm very well hydrated, yes. It's been quite the podcast. Any final thoughts on any subject matter, gentlemen?
No.
I'll say this. James, you'll probably agree with me here. Baseball's coming back. I'm pretty excited about that because I've been so deprived, dehydrated of sports. I will say this. F1 has been amazing to me in the no real sports quarantine lockdown. Watching the F1 races on ESPN and doing the replay at 9 at night if you missed it in the morning, which is easy to do. Tell you what, F1 has really re-illuminated itself in my sporting lifestyle. That's what I'm going to do this weekend. It's the Hungarian Grand Prix, which is always a favorite of mine. So yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah.
So,
F1 has been awesome. I am so glad to have that sport back because, yes, the first race was super exciting. The second race was,
Yeah.
until the last lap when Lando Norris went crazy again. Passes everybody. Man. No, it was really good. And then you have the crazy protest with Racing Point and Renault, and, protesting the car. Lots of drama. Really happy to have sports back. You're right, Greg.
How the Jays going to be this year, James?
Well, it's not so much the question of how they will be; it's where they will be, because the Canadian government, although they let the team come in for 2 weeks to basically live and play in the Skydome because there's a hotel attached to it, they can all just be there. But after 2 weeks they could go out. But the problem is they're going to leave the country and then come back in, and other teams are going to come back in, and Canada's not too keen for that to happen. Quite rightly, because as a country that has, say, 200 new cases a day, why would you let people come in and go from a place like Florida that has 60,000 new cases a day? So it could be facing the Buffalo Blue Jays this year. Which could be fun.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's how they're going.
Buffalo will have a baseball team.
Yeah.
That's new.
Hey, they have Buffalo Bison's AAA affiliate of the Blue Jays. That's why.
They do. You're right.
That's why they're there. Anyway. Cars.
Very cool. Yeah, cars, baseball, Jays. I don't know. The last plan I heard was all the baseball teams were going to play quote unquote local. So the Central Division was going to play the Central. So you wouldn't have too many the coronavirus is spiking in Cincinnati, but it's not spiking there, but those players could come up to Detroit versus, going to Florida. I don't know. It's going to be crazy. F1 seems to be the one sport that's really gotten it right. I'll say that as far as although all the racing series have actually done a pretty good job with that.
And they really don't need fans of all the sports that didn't need fans. And the NBA, they have their Disney World bubble. The NHL, they are in bubbles in Canada. They're not even playing in the United States, which makes a lot of sense. And so they're in bubbles. But the thing is, hockey arenas are enclosed. They're smaller facilities. There's a lot of them. A baseball field is a whole different thing. There's not a lot of places outside of Florida and Arizona, places you don't want to be generally in August, let alone this August. So that gives them a problem. And then the NFL, well, they don't really care about the health and safety of their players, so it doesn't really matter. They can just go. They'll do whatever.
It is interesting to see the different approaches each league is taking. It's getting kind of random.
Yeah.
Wow. When I said any final thoughts, I think we dropped down to the sports rabbit hole.
Sports talk.
It's your fault.
It's true. I did throw out the whatever you're going to be watching. So we could probably just re-loop, go to the start, and just start talking about the Bronco again. Just
sure.
Re-loop back to that, and we'll do a marathon podcast. We start taking sponsorships, pick a charity, crowdfund this thing. I think we'll leave it there. It's been fun, guys. Enjoy the F1 races this weekend. You just listened to the very long Autoblog podcast. We'll see you next week, everybody.